watching us now.
Okay.
So, good afternoon, everyone. If you are watching us from wherever you're watching us, welcome to our topic for today. Our host is Mulangi, which is me, and we have Victor today. Victor is a current scholar at the University of Bradford, which studies sustainable development. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. So today we're just having a chat with Victor to get to know Victor, who is one of the Chevening scholars, and just get a bit up close and personal. So if you could just introduce yourself and where you're from in Zambia.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. And thanks, Mulangi, for having me on this live chat today. So, like Mulangi has said, my name's Victor Kaonga, 2019-2020 Chevening scholar. I'm pursuing my master's in sustainable development at University of Bradford. Uh, Currently almost finishing, so working on my dissertation and my final coursework. So yeah, uh, that's pretty much about who I am, and of course we'll get to know more about each other later.
Right. So maybe to get going, so how did you know about the Chevening scholarship? I'm curious to know how did it all start for you? How did the journey start? You know.
Okay, so my chevening journey is quite a bit, I say it a little bit weird, I would say, but somehow it's been a revelation. So initially, I got to know about chevening somewhere in 2017. Should have been 2017. Was when I was in my final year at uni. So
That
there were, sorry.
that the University of Zambia.
Yes, when I was at the University of Zambia doing my undergrad, I was pursuing my development studies program there. So there was a friend that was a current scholar back in 2017. So when I think should have been on Facebook when I saw him post about him getting the scholarship. Then I went and read more about it, then I got interested from that. So by the time I was graduating in 2017, that was December, I started to look at exactly what were the qualifications, what was the criteria. So in the early 2018, when I started to build my work towards the application, I
Yeah.
started like to volunteer. Then also like I had to find people that could share a bit of tips here and there. And few of the previous scholars, particularly I would mention them, Bevins, were quite very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think from there onwards, it was about just doing what was needed for me to apply the scholarship. And I remember the day I dropped the essays was like I felt quite relieved, but also I felt like it was something that I had been preparing for over a year. So that's just about it, about how I came to know about the chevening.
Okay. And so how many times did you attempt to get the scholarship? Did you get it on a first attempt?
Yeah, okay. So my application, luckily, I've heard of stories that people applying several times more than once. But luckily for me, or fortunately, I would say I was one of those privileged scholars who had it at first attempt. Uh, I would say I was glad that in our cohort we are the 25 of us, and I happened to be one of those. So it was something that I think was quite a big step in my career, in my professional life, like having to apply for the first time and having to get it. I think that was a game changer. And looking back, it's something that I really, really like. It has changed a lot of things in my journey so far.
Great to know. And your program. So how did you end up studying sustainable development? What led you?
Okay. All right. Thank you. So initially, when I checked out Chevening, I looked at what was needed. So, as you are aware, Chevening usually focuses on 4 aspects of the applicants: leadership, program of study. They look at career. Then, besides the career, they also look at obviously the aspect about like what.
Hello, Victor, are you there? I lost you for a second.
And other things from sustainable due to the work that we doing. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. I got you.
Yeah. So before I applied, I was working as a researcher for one of the international NGOs back in Zambia. And my work mostly was related in community as well as sustainable landscape programs around the east and the southern of Zambia.
Yeah.
So with my background in development studies, the decision was quite easy as I was looking for something much more specific and something tailored to what I want to do once I'm done. Like my career was to work in issues that relate to poverty, community development, and sustainable programs that are being run by most international NGOs back home. So having to decide on MSc Sustainable Development at Bradford, it was due to the fact that the program, the structure, it had the specific interest I had. Then also looking at my experience, it was something that also was fitting into the needs of Chevening. So it was a combination of the uni, what Chevening wanted, as well as my career plan.
And then in terms of uh, your experience so far, I mean, we'll get to talk about managing under this stressful situation that COVID has brought. But
Yeah.
besides that, on in your experience, what you've experienced so far in the UK, how do
Sorry,
you?
would you say that again?
Yeah, I was saying, what the experiences that you've had in the UK currently, how do you think they will impact your drive and how you apply yourself when you go back home, uh, relating to your plans, your career plans, as well as what you just wish to accomplish when you get back home?
Okay, so right now, like I pointed out, I'm on the verge of finishing my program. I'm working on my dissertation, and my current interest is climate change and water. As you are aware, currently Zambia is facing some problems in the energy sector, and that has so much links to our water resource management plans, programs, and objectives. Then climate change is one of the current hot issues. So we are looking at carbon taxing, climate finance. So with the knowledge and my experience so far I've been able to gain here, I'm looking forward to continue and bridge myself through that direction. So I'm seeking to go back, hopefully, if everything goes well, could be this year, it could be next year, but there is a lot at stake. So that's not the definite decision I can give you right now. But
Yeah.
of course, I'm looking forward to continue in that direction. Most possibly, we'll see what like the world has out there. But my kind of skills that I've developed now since the time I arrived in the UK are much more tailored in towards the direction of uh, natural resource management, seeking to work with international NGOs related to poverty reduction, and also trying to continue with the previous projects I was doing with a few of the international organizations I was engaged to. So we'll see what opportunities are there, but definitely that's just a bit of what's on the table.
Okay, that's interesting. So let's now talk about your arrival and how that experience was. Take us through the highlights of your transition from moving from Zambia to here and finally settling in Bradford in preparation for your studies.
Okay, so actually, I do remember the first day I received the email. If you are gonna ask me that question, definitely I'm going to take you back to the day I received my email. Like, I remember it was a quiet day. I was home. It was in the morning, so I just had like, okay, hey Victor, congratulations, blah 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 blah. I'm sure you are aware. I didn't even finish reading the email first. I was excited already. I started like planning. Because I was late. One thing that I have to acknowledge is that by the time I was getting my conditionally selected email, my uni, the opening date was almost near because I got my acceptance around August there. So school was starting in September. So I had some bit of short time to prepare myself and just get to organize myself for the trip. However, lucky enough, the Chevening Secretariat were quite prompt. They facilitated my travel, and I arrived on the 16th of September last year via Manchester, dropped at Bradford. It was exciting, and I should acknowledge that the town and the city generally in Bradford, it's quite diverse. The people that I found here, the previous alumni that I found here, the Zambians and other Chevening scholars from Africa and across the world, I think they made it very easy for me to settle in. But of course, it was a bit challenging because I came when it was very cold. So I carried something warm. So but I know we'll talk about this, but when I just arrived, it was something that I like. The first thing I noticed was how cold this place was. Then also how technologically efficient it is in other aspects. So those were some of the interesting first things I noticed. And then my uni was very supportive in helping me settle down. I had a couple of friends. By the time I was reaching here, I had made a couple of friends, fellow scholars. And obviously, if there's anything I would say, is the fact that when you're a Chevening scholar, you get the opportunity to meet people from far places. And one of the aspects that I had when I received my acceptance is that I connected with certain people online via Facebook. Then they created a WhatsApp group for Bradford Chevening scholars. So at the time I was landing in Bradford, I already knew guys from Rwanda, Malawi. I also knew somebody from Kenya. I also had my fellow scholars back home that were coming here. So we had to organize in terms of accommodation. They made it much easier because some of them landed much earlier than me. Yeah, so it was very exciting.
So we can say you were putting to practice your networking skills as you preached about in your interview, not so?
Exactly, and that's the most interesting part. When you are selected, the aspect of proving your leadership skills start at a point when you are now preparing to depart for your studies. Because believe you me, there are a lot of benefits that, like the Chevening badge, that tag they give you, all those cards you're given. There's a lot of benefits that have come in terms of social networking that I've had here, even in uni. And the community here is quite diverse. So you have everyone, the Asian, African community, as well as the locals. So settling in is much easier. Of course, there's always that part of you that miss the home taste, But then when you meet your fellow Africans, they tell you where to get what, and that makes it very easy. And I was privileged to be that kind of a person that benefited from the scholars I found here.
Okay. Yeah. And so in terms of challenges and coping right now, so I think the world is going through a pandemic right now,
Yeah.
which is slowly in some parts of the UK, things are slowly opening up now. But how have you been? How have you been coping? You know, how hard has it been to keep up with your studies, with what's happening around, and how what methods or what techniques have you been using to just keep sane and just make sure you're mentally healthy?
Okay, so you are right. The COVID has equally hit everyone hard, and even master students and all students like haven't been an exception. For me personally, what has worked is I've taken advantage of my social circle around here. Although we are socially distancing, much of the stuff has gone virtual. So I've used this time to catch up with friends. Also, we've been setting up virtual meetings around here. Then prior to the social distancing and lockdown, I'm a gym person. I like to work out quite often. So when the gyms, they closed, it was time that I started some home workout as well as running a bit, though not so much like you, but mostly I've taken use of the time to work inside. I had a small workout room here at my apartment where I stay with the guys. Then also, it was a time where also I got to meet my roommates more often. When we can, maybe we had a meal together. Obviously, we catch up since we couldn't step out and meet other people. Then on top of that, I think our uni also, especially our department, they've been setting up, they had been setting up online parties. Also, besides that, we had one-to-one meetings with our supervisors. So they were always reaching out, trying to catch up on exactly what's going on. If you have any issues, the union also, they had a lot of activities that were going on. But I should mention that, of course, this is the life that no one was so used to. So as much as they were putting up all those things, there is an aspect of where like it was hard to continue with certain work. For example, we had group works before the lockdown, and you and me agree that the lockdown made it difficult because group work works well when you meet with your friends, you discuss, you share ideas.
That's very true.
Yeah, so we had to finish certain group work online, which was a very tricky because to some extent you felt like people needed that social presence where somebody would explain clearly and not just online. And the submission was also an issue. But gladly, we managed to pull through. And now I'm working on my final paper, which so far I think we've gotten used to it, as they call it, the new normal.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, and then in terms of so let's move to culture. Coming from Zambia, where our culture is definitely very different from the British culture. So what are the things that you found interesting? What are the things that, to some extent shocked you? And what are those things that just like interesting things that you'd want to talk about in terms of the cultural differences, the similarities, and is anything else around culture?
Okay, culture shock. Okay, firstly, I was always surprised, like in one of the meetings when I met like my coordinator here, my friends who've been here for some time, they would talk about culture shock, especially when I just arrived. No, beware of culture shock, beware of culture shock. But my expectation was quite different. But it's only now that I realize that I've really experienced quite a number of culture shock. So I'll just highlight some of the few things that I've found to be quite interesting about the British culture. So
Okay.
number one is, I feel, the public affection of love, like how the British themselves, like they express themselves when you go to the supermarket. Uh,
Okay.
so everyone is so friendly, like they call you love, darling. Hey, darling, you need some help. So that's not like something I was so much used to coming back
Okay.
from home. Yeah,
Mm.
so slowly I had to adjust. Then there are other just things I would mention. I know they are social, but just like maybe couples, you'd see couples kissing in the road and other things like that. As an international student, you find it a little bit weird, but to some extent, it's quite normal.
Yeah.
Then there's a part of food that I would like to mention. So the British diet mostly is made up of sandwiches, cheese. Uh, so I come from a country where Anshima like is the
I
thing.
know. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you go to the shopping to the supermarket. You're asking, no, I'm looking for mili meal there. Of course, we are privileged. Chevening alumni will tell us, okay, you can find it, but you had to learn it. There's one aspect where you have the information and then there's the experience. So
Yeah.
you go maybe in a supermarket looking for maybe a 10 kg bag of milli meal, and maybe they don't even use milli meal here as the word. So they have another name they use for that. For me to locate and find the actual shop I could get the foods I wanted
Mm-hmm.
was quite a hassle. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
the weather also was tricky, like I mentioned earlier. So I thought I had enough warm clothing.
Yeah.
And I thought June. Right now, people back home are saying June is cold, and
Exactly.
oh yeah. So I thought I would handle that, but later on I realized it gets cold here, and whatsoever clothes I brought with myself here, I found myself going to buy more warm clothing
Mm-hmm.
because of that fact. And then during that time also it gets dark for long hours. So you find that your sleeping patterns change also.
Exactly.
You sleep at times you're not used at sleeping. So those were some of the highlights that usually shocked me with the culture here. So back home, it's quite different, but those are some of the highlights I would point out.
Okay. And then in terms of, because I know weather is a really big aspect that really people struggle with,
Yeah,
especially if they're moving here for the first time.
yeah.
It has a big impact in terms of how people cope. So what coping mechanisms did you employ to help you, make it through, especially winter, where you have lots of gray weather, you have, less sunlight as we are used to back home.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what were your coping mechanisms in that
Okay,
aspect?
so one of the ways that I really found myself like that worked for me was one, getting those energy, the thermos, because they have special clothes here that they sell to cope with the weather, especially when it gets cold. So if you are a new person coming to the UK, uh, I would recommend like getting the warm clothing as soon as you can, especially the thermals and other things are much helpful. Then you also find yourself a habit. Like for me, like I said, it was a workout.
Mm-hmm.
So I have actually even now, I have a specific schedule where early in the morning and late in the evening, whether it was dark or not, I had to be at the gym. So that kept me focused. And also, when you are working out, it keeps you warm. And more often than not, you tend to burn out a little bit of some stress or some sort of anxiety you might be developing. So workout, running. Also, I was playing soccer with the union. So I found myself playing football with colleagues here. That is amateur football. So I got myself into those hobbies and I really found them quite helpful, and they really pushed me out of that time and they helped me cope very well.
Okay, that's great. And then in terms of traveling,
oh, sorry. Actually, before I forget,
yeah.
one other key culture shock that I have experienced right now is the fact that the UK, when you're back home, back in Africa or in Zambia, you just know one type of English.
Mm-hmm.
But when you come to the UK, you realize that there's various versions or accents of English. So one of the
that
key
is
culture.
You mean in reference to the British accents, right?
Exactly, the British accent. So you discover that, okay, when you go to the South, you notice very different accents to the ones on the East. Or when you go to Manchester, there's a different accent than you find maybe in Merseyside, Liverpool, Everton there. I haven't been to Scotland, but of course, those are some of the things. I've met people like from there. We had a professor coming from the university somewhere in Scotland. The accent is quite different. So on culture shock, that's something I've also learned about the British and their culture, particularly when it comes to language. So I found that to be very interesting, and I think it has come as a culture shock because you don't see that when you're not here.
Okay. And then in terms of when we talk about traveling, so what places have you been to in terms of what are your highlights in terms of traveling? And then also how, if for a scholar who's studying a one-year master's, which is really intense, how do you manage to, mix your strict study times with, your traveling, and how do you balance things up?
Okay, so actually, I remember this question was also asked, like in my interview as a scholar.
Mm-hmm.
How are you planning to attend the events that Chevening organized for you, commit yourself to academic works, as well as also explore the UK? So before I came here, I thought it was going to be straightforward thing, but as you are aware, part of that plan has been impacted by the corona. So in my first semester, I was able to attend, I was privileged to attend 2 events organized by Chevening, one in London, the welcoming event. Then I also attended the future mobility events in Milton Keynes.
Okay.
So how I structured my program in terms of traveling, I restricted much of my traveling to weekends, as well as specific days that I had less classes, because at the same time, you have to strike a balance between your academic demands as well as your opportunity to travel. So I found myself traveling more over the weekends, as well as on Thursdays when I had less classes, as well as I didn't have so much commitment. So what I would encourage a scholar who's looking to explore the UK at the same time commit themselves to the studies is that you need to budget, because traveling also takes into account planning. So you need to plan and budget your trips very well. It's like, so if there's one thing I've had to learn here is that lack of planning costs you big time here. So if you're just gonna wake up over the weekend and say, I want to go to Liverpool, you pay a lot of money to book a ticket, either a rail ticket or a bus to go there. So I found myself planning way in advance before I traveled. Of course, the cheapest modes of transport is bus, but the fastest often is by train. as well as airlines. So depending on where you are going, you need to factor in the costs and the distance. So I've visited London, I've been to Liverpool. Of course, I'm intending to go back there as much as I can. I've been to Leeds, I've been to Batley. These are places in West Yorkshire. Then I've been to Haworth also. So I'm still intending to travel if the lockdown is completely lifted. I still have some more travel destination I still have planned. I've planned for myself. So especially Scotland, because people, they say you can't be a scholar in the UK and you haven't passed through Scotland. So Scotland, Wales are still part of my to visit list. Hopefully, where you are.
Right. And then in terms of, so out of all the places that you've been to, do you have any favorites? Is there some, is there a city that stands out for you?
Yeah. Okay. So it depends. So when you look at in terms of infrastructure, culture, or in terms of like just the general experience, I would say so far I've had amazing experience in Manchester and Liverpool. So I've been to Manchester more than twice. One was with a school trip there. We went to meet the mayor of Manchester. So we toured the city, their innovation plans, understanding their plans regarding transport, mobility, how they are seeking to restructure the city development. I think when I look back so far, that has been my highlight so far, because I got to know more about how the city of Manchester rakes in a lot of billions to the economy of the UK, more than countries like Wales and other things. Then also their metropolitan structures. So we had the whole day there, and we had a couple of friends, and the people that I got to meet there, I think that still stands out. Then also, I think Liverpool also ranks in pretty close, because I had the chance to visit the Slave Museum there. I got to know a bit of Black history and slavery there. Then also I got to visit Anfield, which is one of my favorite places currently. So I got to see the museum there, see the pitch, the stadium, then meet the people there. So those two places and those two visits have been my highlights so far. Of course, I've had amazing time in Leeds as well, but if you were to ask me, those two travel events ranks up high.
Okay, and then so we'll probably, this is probably the last question, unless if there's anything else that you would want to talk about. So so from your experience, I think probably you briefly touched on this aspect, but when you get to, when it's time for you to go back home and apply yourself and apply the knowledge and the skills that you've attained in this period, what do you think is one thing that especially in your line of work, what do you think that one thing is that would greatly make a difference if it was handled differently back home, based on your experience here? And is there like anything that your experience has shaped, how you would handle that particular thing? For example, in terms of, because you are in sustainable development. So, so what is the one thing that you think we as Zambians have the capability to do, but we are not doing, and probably we could even do it better than it's down out there in the West?
Okay, so I really would that, that's a very tempting question.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I would like to keep it brief and straight to the point. From my experience, I think one of the highlights I've been able to notice is the fact that leadership on this other side, as well as commitment to development plans and project. There's a top-down approach in terms of how plans are implemented and are initiated, and there's very effective and efficient use of resources. So here, each type of resource counts. For example, I would like to touch a bit on the aspect of energy. So the UK right now, they don't have so much solar energy because the sun here, it's not as much as we have it back home. But you discover that when it comes to energy, they don't just rely on coal, but they have wind, they also have solar energy. Now, that is something that has taken years of planning and investment. Then also we are looking at how those plans have been able to stay for years, even when there's a change of leadership at the top there. So if there's something that I've learned about the way the British handle their programs in terms of development plans, how they manage their resources, it's the consistency in terms of planning and how sustainable they manage their resources which they have. Back home, we have enough resources. Forget the minerals. Let's look at maybe the water resources as well as the solar energy. In this area, we would expect, at least with the labor that we have, the skills that our people have developed over the years, we don't lack technocrats that could help the government in those lines. Yeah, but we find that we have good plans, but they're just on the table. And when you change a leadership at the top, there is lack of implementation of those plans. Or if there is implementation, you find that consistency lack. And that is shown in the energy sector, where we have continued to experience problem of load shedding. When here, these guys are using solar and wind. And these are plans that have taken over 100 years. They've been there over 100 years. And what we consider as what we think resources that we take for granted back home, here they're a luxury. And that has been embedded into the culture that the British people have developed. So the leaders are so much accountable to their people, and the people over the years have developed trust in the institutions they have put in place. You find the councils here are quite powerful. They are well run. I had an opportunity to tour the Leeds City Council, the Bradford City Council in my time here. Yeah. They are sustainable. There are methods of recycling waste. There are ways of distributing water in the city, goes down to the tax that the people pay and how they invest it back into their community. So here, tax is a big thing. Everyone has trust in the institution, in the councils. So they are able to collect enough revenue, which allows the councils to run very efficiently. Now, that's a complex issue at once, but when you look at that commitment from the leaders, it speaks volume in the development we've been able to see. Of course, it might be impractical to compare with Zambia generally, but I believe certain issues, especially in the line of resource management, if we could put our acts together as a country, and we personally, as scholars, if we get back and work with our leaders back home, I think these are things we need to begin to take initiative as well.
So would you say accountability is one of our biggest challenges in that case then, and how we look at certain things and how we perceive certain things, not so?
Yeah, it's a combination. I wouldn't really say 100% just accountability, but it also boils down to the aspect also of governance. So accountability is a problem to some extent, but it deals with also how we put our priority as a country, and not just Zambia, but Africa in general, you know. So when you come here, you learn to appreciate the riches that we have in Africa, and you see how efficient the systems here are. You are in Swansea, Mulangi. I'm sure you would agree with me, like the rail system, the bus systems here, the way they operate, the way they use IT in collecting revenue. There are no loopholes, maybe for inefficiency, corruption, or what. The police, how they operate. So all those factors, they cannot just boil down to one aspect. It's a collection of factors, and that also goes with in terms of leadership, also how we as a country, we set our priorities. So we need to start getting our acts together, especially where it comes to resource management, and that includes minerals, water, and also other aspects of maybe human skills, because those are the future for our country. If there's anything I've learned, is that that could be key drivers to our unlocking the poverty struggles that our country continues to face.
All right. Yeah. And I think it's on that note that we come to the end of our chat. Thank you very much for putting time aside to join us today, and wishing you all the best in your studies. And to everyone who watched this, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next interview.